December 1476. In the forests of Romania, an army was retreating in secret. Snow was falling, and beneath that snow lay a secret that would confuse the world for the next 500 years. The name that still makes people shudder today, Dracula, was not just a character from a novel. He was a real man, a real ruler, and the way his death was recorded in the history books is not the whole truth. This is the story of Vlad III, known to the world as Vlad the Impaler, and his final hours, and the secret that stayed buried for centuries. First, let's make one thing clear. Bram Stoker's novel Dracula, written in 1897, was fiction, but its name was borrowed from a real historical figure, Vlad Dracula, or Vlad III, who was the voivode, or ruler, of the region of Wallachia, which today is part of Romania. His father was named Vlad II, known as Dracul, meaning dragon, because he was a member of a Christian military society called the Order of the Dragon, and so the son, Vlad III, came to be called Dracula, meaning son of the dragon. 15th century Eastern Europe was no less than a horror novel itself. The Ottoman Empire was expanding on every front, and small states like Wallachia were caught between two powerful enemies, the Ottoman Turks on one side and the Christian Kingdom of Hungary on the other, and survival demanded ruthless opportunism. Vlad's childhood was no easier. At a young age, he and his younger brother Radu were sent as hostages to the Ottoman Sultan's court to ensure their father's loyalty, and there the two brothers spent years learning the Ottoman way of life and the art of war. Some historians believe it was there that the hardness within Vlad was forged, the very trait that would later define him. When he returned to Wallachia and took the throne, his reign was soaked in bloodshed and political maneuvering, and he earned the title the Impaler because he punished his enemies, whether Ottoman soldiers or corrupt noblemen from his own land, by impaling them on sharpened wooden stakes. It's said that on one occasion, an invading enemy army retreated in sheer terror after coming upon a forest filled with thousands of impaled bodies. But here's something important to understand. Vlad was not simply a tyrant. To the people of Wallachia, he was a ruler who stamped out corruption, ended theft and lawlessness, and fought to protect his homeland from Ottoman conquest. And even today, some in Romania regard him as a national hero. By 1476, Vlad was in the third and final phase of his rule. He had twice before been removed from the throne, once due to conspiracies among his own noblemen, once due to Ottoman pressure, and this time he had reclaimed the throne with Hungarian and Moldavian support. But he had little time left. Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II, the very man who had conquered Constantinople, wanted Vlad eliminated once and for all, and he had installed his own man on the Wallachian throne, Vlad's own younger brother Radu, who had grown up in the Ottoman court and sided with them. This was not merely a war. It was a tragedy between two brothers who had once been held hostage together as children, but who now stood as enemies because of the paths their countries and loyalties had taken. In December 1476, Vlad had only a small force. Some historians say he had barely 400 loyal soldiers with him, while the Ottoman army and their Wallachian allies vastly outnumbered him, and Vlad was preparing for his final battle near Bucharest, in an area believed today to be close to Snagov. This is the moment where the history books begin to blur. The traditional account is that Vlad III died in battle in December 1476, fighting the Ottoman forces somewhere near the Wallachian border, but when we examine historians' research, Ottoman and Hungarian records from that period, and later archaeological evidence, the story becomes far less clear. The first question: how exactly did Vlad die? According to some old Ottoman and Wallachian accounts, during the battle, some men within his own army, who may not have actually been his men, or who were mistaken for enemy soldiers in the chaos, accidentally killed him, meaning his death may have been the result of friendly fire, not enemy action. A second account claims he was betrayed by some of his own noblemen, because staying loyal to Vlad had become dangerous for them, while making peace with the Ottomans was far more advantageous. A third, more dramatic account, written later, claims that Vlad himself died fighting disguised as an enemy soldier, so that his foes wouldn't recognize him, and that when his head was cut off, they didn't even realize whom they had killed until his clothing and weapons confirmed his identity. What all these accounts agree on is this: Vlad's head was severed from his body, and Ottoman soldiers preserved it in honey and sent it to Sultan Mehmed II in Constantinople to prove that their greatest enemy was no longer alive, and it said the head was put on public display at the city gates. But here the real historical difficulty begins. What happened to his body, nobody knows for certain. Roman Catholic and later popular tradition holds that Vlad was buried at Snagov Monastery, a small monastery in the middle of a lake, where he himself had made donations during his lifetime, and this site is still famous today as Dracula's grave for tourists. But in the 20th century, when archaeologists opened the tomb at Snagov Monastery, where Vlad was supposedly buried, they found only animal bones, not human ones. The grave was empty, or perhaps was never his grave at all. Then in 2022, a new twist emerged. Italian and Romanian researchers, working on old documents held in a church in Naples, Italy, proposed a theory that Vlad's body may have been secretly taken by his friends and relatives and buried elsewhere, possibly somewhere near Naples, where his daughter had married and settled. This is only a theory and proven, but it shows that the mystery of the real Dracula's grave remains unsolved to this day. Now let's talk about his head, which is the most documented part of this story, yet remains just as mysterious. According to Ottoman records and European letters from that time, when Sultan Mehmed II received confirmation of Vlad's head, the news spread rapidly across the Ottoman Empire in Europe, and this was not just a military victory. It was a psychological one, because Vlad, who for a decade had been a symbol of terror for the Ottoman Empire, was now finally gone, or so it seemed. Some accounts say the head was later displayed at a gate in Constantinople, or some public place for a period of time, so that everyone could see that the impaler was now as helpless as the enemies he once impaled. But what ultimately happened to the head, whether it was buried, discarded, or kept in some private collection, there is no solid record. It lies buried somewhere in the Ottoman archives, or has been lost forever. This is one of those moments in history where all we can say is this: a man who was so terrifying in life that his name would be remembered for centuries, ended up, after death, so scattered and undocumented that even today no one can say with certainty where he lies. This raises the question: how did Vlad the Impaler, a real Eastern European ruler who fought for his homeland, become a vampire still portrayed drinking blood in Hollywood movies today? The answer is propaganda and the printing press. During Vlad's own lifetime, German-speaking Saxon merchants, whose relations with him had turned sour because he punished their wrongdoing, began printing pamphlets against him, and these pamphlets spread rapidly thanks to Europe's new printing press technology. You could call it 15th century viral content. These pamphlets portrayed Vlad as a bloodthirsty, cannibalistic tyrant who ate his meals while dipping bread in his enemy's blood. Most of these stories were exaggerations, part of political propaganda, but they spread across Europe for centuries. Centuries later, when Bram Stoker was writing his Gothic horror novel, he researched for an Eastern European villain, and the name Dracula, and the region of Wallachia suited his purpose, and he used very little of Vlad's actual history, just the name and the setting. Everything else was his own fictional creation. So the Dracula we see in films is not Vlad III. He is a fictional character who merely borrowed his name. But the true story of Vlad, his wars, his death, and his missing grave, is no less compelling than any horror novel. Today, 500 years later, we still cannot say with certainty how Vlad III, the real Dracula, died, where his body went, or where his head was ultimately buried. What history we've read was mostly written by his enemies, tales of Ottoman conquest, or Saxon printing press propaganda, and the truth is probably buried somewhere between the two. Perhaps that's why the story of Vlad the Impaler still draws us in today. It isn't just the story of a cruel ruler, it's the story of a man who fought for his land, who stood against his own brother, and whose death remains a mystery to this day. The real Dracula's grave may never be found, but his story of war, betrayal, and a missing body will remain alive forever, more alive than the very books that call him a monster. If you like this history documentary, please subscribe, and thanks for watching.